Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be discussing The Violent Bear It Away by Flannery O'Connor. This is the second of only two novels that she wrote. She has a number of short stories, but she's gotten a lot of attention in recent years, not just from people like myself, traditional Catholics who are intrigued by O'Connor's Catholic background, but from people looking to discredit Flannery O'Connor for those same reasons. I actually was pleased to be able to read this recently because I had picked it up some years ago. I'm trying to think when. It must have been 2009, 2010, so maybe 10 years ago, at her childhood home in Savannah, Georgia, which, if you've never been to Savannah, Georgia, it's worth it just to go to see the city. It's beautiful, it's well decorated, and it's very unusual for an American town. There's a series of squares that not just slow down traffic and, in a sense, pedestrianize the city, but there are so many gorgeous staircases and period homes that have survived to the present day. So Savannah itself is a destination not just for the Flannery O'Connor childhood home, which is across the street from a really beautiful church as well. So, The Violent Bear It Away. It's a challenging book in many ways, and it mirrors the ideas in Wise Blood, which is her only other novel. So there are two novels by Flannery O'Connor, as they say, and a bunch of short stories. And it deals with the same themes, the problem of good and evil in the modern world, specifically the American South. She writes in the tradition of William Faulkner, Walker Percy, and to an extent Eudora Welty. And you can feel the history, the style, the smell of the South all around you. Now, it's usual for me in these reviews not just to give you a plot summary, because my assumption is you'll read the book or you'll not want me to just give you a summary as part of why I'm recommending this. So I want to stick to one or two main ideas that intrigued me and I hope would encourage you to read the book, because I think it's a good book to read. The struggle between good and evil starts early on in the novel and takes us all the way to the end. The devil shows up as an imaginary friend to one of the main characters, Tarwater, who's a young man. He's called Young Tarwater because his older relative who'd raised him was Old Tarwater. So this is the Young Tarwater. And he's digging a grave because Old Tarwater has died, and he had promised that he would bury him. And the imaginary friend right away is trying to undermine this intention, undermine this work. And I'm reading from the Farrar, Straus and Giroux edition. This is page 39. And the imaginary friend, as I say, is trying to talk him out. And so this is the imaginary friend. After a pause, he continued, "The way I see it," he said, "you can do one of two things. One of them, not both. Nobody can do both of two things without straining themselves. You can do one thing, or you can do the opposite." "Jesus or the devil," the boy said. "No, no, no," the stranger said. "There ain't no such thing as a devil. I can tell you that from my own self-experience. I know that for a fact. It ain't Jesus or the devil. It's Jesus or you." "Jesus or me," Tarwater repeated. He put the shovel down for a rest and thought. So, in a sense, the devil is busy saying he doesn't exist. So he identifies himself early on. But in a sense, the devil's interpretation is unwittingly correct. In Catholic spirituality, we are taught to choose Christ above ourselves, to dissolve ourselves within him in our growth of trying to know ourselves and to know him better. And so the choice between Jesus and self isn't one that is antagonistic in the traditional sense in which we are fighting an enemy, but in which we are seeking to come to a union. So the idea of it's Jesus or me should not be a frightening thought. But to this young, simple, underdeveloped mind, Tarwater's, it's a far more challenging idea. And that tension occupies the vast majority of this book. And at the heart of that is the argument or at least the question that's posed about giving a child religion, the antagonist to young Tarwater's protagonist is his uncle, who, let's say, is representing liberal values, free thinking, atheism, and the idea of you don't need Jesus to save you because you can save yourself. But the problem is, propaganda is not in itself negative, right? The idea that only fully formed adults can make informed decisions is inaccurate. We know, for example, parents, and to an extent society, decide dress and food and manners and education not in consultation with a child. They don't dress a child in a certain way and then say, oh, by the way, when you turn 18, you can feel free to choose how to dress for yourself. Or they don't leave the child to dress him or herself when the child's 5 or 6. Say, well, I don't want to impose my clothing values on the child. Same thing with food. I don't want to impose my food choices on this child. Or manners or education. We make these choices for children not because we're trying to propagandize them in the negative connotation that word has taken up, but in a sense because we're trying to give them values. And sure, if you want to use that term propagandizing, I think you can look up the term in the dictionary. It's not negative. The term itself, propaganda itself, is neutral. It simply states that you're trying to push a particular point of view. Whether the point of view is good or bad is a different question. But propaganda itself is a neutral word, however much the connotation may have shifted in our time period. And so, if we see propagandizing as purely negative, we're going to miss the heart of the argument here, which is Tarwater is given this religious propaganda, and he struggles with whether he should accept it or not for most of this book. And Tarwater's reaction to being free of this father figure is predictably adolescent. And we may have, I've certainly gone through this. I'm sure that some of those of you who are watching this, you'll have gone through this. Now that I'm free from these shackles, I will now choose otherwise, simply because I can. Not because I disbelieve in these values, but because I want to show my agency and I want to show my freedom, disregarding whether those values are true. And it's important to realize that he goes through this journey throughout this book in which he understands that you can freely choose to believe what you were taught when you were younger without being a prisoner of this propaganda. You can turn around the end and say, yes, I was taught this as a child, but I also as an adult accept this. I'm not accepting it solely because I was taught as a child and I can't escape my programming. But in fact, quite the opposite. Despite having it forced upon him in a strong manner, and hence having that feeling that all of us have of wanting to reject something that's put onto us quite strongly, he, after a struggle, decides that he does want to cooperate with it. And being propagandized is insufficient reason to reject something. If you are propagandized to believe that you should say thank you and you're welcome by your parents, you don't just reject it because you were propagandized into doing it by your parents. You should reject it because you don't find it valuable. You don't find it true. Not simply because you were taught. And so that argument, this child was just given religion and then he's going to become a prisoner of it, is the argument that teeters back and forth between the uncle and Tarwater all throughout the book after the older relative had raised him. And for my part, speaking outside of this fictional universe and in my own, I'm grateful for almost all the propagandizing I received from my parents as I grew up. And whatever I may disagree with now, I don't carry any sort of resentment about it, because there are so many ways to live this life in a practical manner that to believe that there's only one way to do it is silly at best. So all that being said, this book is definitely not for kids. It's a rough one in a number of ways, and it will resist easy categorization or understanding. But I think after you finish it and after you've let it sit and digest within your mind, it will haunt you in the way that I think her other works will, because you'll marvel at her willingness to hold the mirror up to nature and her perspicacity in perceiving the realities of fallen human nature, particularly in our modern world, particularly in the American South. And we should not shy away from those realities, those ugly realities of fallen human nature, but we should embrace it as part of the human journey, as part of the realities of this life, and as the only way to combat whatever we run into in life by being honest about what it is that we're facing, instead of trying to cover it up, instead of trying to pretend it doesn't exist, like the devil would so very much like for us to believe, and wants Tarwater to believe at the beginning of this book. Anyway, so that's my summary. Violent Buried Away by Flannery O'Connor. Strongly recommended. If you'd like this video, please hit like. If you'd like to see other videos like this, hit subscribe. You'll get notified whenever these videos get posted. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.